I'd just like to welcome everyone to the April 21st, 2022 online meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are designed to meet the governor's executive orders allowing online meetings during the COVID pandemic. Our meetings are being recorded through WebEx to be posted later on our website. I guess I should say, Juliet, I assume you're starting the recording at the appropriate time. Thank you. Our meeting agenda today from 9 to 10:30, we have the WSBLE cost savings and refinements concepts briefing. And then we have from 10:30 to 11 o'clock commissioner business. Adam Arnheim, one of our commissioners, is recused today. So the meeting format, we will start with the team. We'll provide a briefing on the proposal. Time for public comment afterwards if there are any public attending. We'll have an opportunity for the public to comment after the presentations. Please sign up on the sheet attached to the meeting agenda. When it is time for public comment, please use the hand raising function on WebEx and we'll make sure that we recognize people. The hand raising function is in the lower right hand corner on the format, 2 minutes per person. Okay, so why don't we start now with commissioner introductions in alphabetical order.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Molly Link Cody, Transportation Planner Commissioner.
Good morning, Elaine Wine, Architect Commissioner.
Hello, Elizabeth Connor, Artist Commissioner.
Morning, Erica Bush, Urban Design Commissioner.
Hi, Jewel Carreri, At-Large Commissioner.
Hi, Matt Alfs, Architect Commissioner.
Good morning, Molly Spitalnik, Get Engaged Commissioner and Urban Designer.
Hi there, Pooja Shah, Engineer Commissioner.
I guess that's me. And Benita Sidhu, Landscape Architect Commissioner and Chair. And I am running the meeting today as Michael Jenkins and Valerie Canast are out today. Juliet, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Juliet Acevedo, staff. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, and then I will turn it over to Kate and Sloan. I think we all know who you are, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Kate Lichtenstein. I'm a light rail development manager at Sound Transit on the West Seattle and Ballard Link Extensions project. Go ahead, Sloan.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sloan Dawson, Station Planning and Urban Design project. Good to see you again.
Great, and it looks like we have Rico attending today. Hello, and Sloan, whenever you want to, or Kate. Morning.
Rico Kidding-Dongo, Acting Director, Office of Planning, Community Development.
Thank you. Kate, are you starting us off today?
I will. Actually, I'll give most of the presentation, so I can go ahead and start and share my screen if that works. Okay. Okay. Can you see that? Let's get my screens organized here.
Yes.
Okay, great. And let me just switch real quick so I can look forward. Okay, can you see that now? All right, so yeah, I will give most of the presentation and Sloan will chime in as appropriate on some of the station concepts that we're talking about. So today, thank you for having us present. We will be focusing on just give a quick project overview and then be talking about our cost savings and refinements work. So quickly, I know you've all seen this before, but just to orient us to where we are in the project, we are in the planning phase of the West Seattle and Ballard Link Extensions project. We completed alternatives development in 2019, which led us to entering the environmental phase and publishing a draft EIS in early 2022. We are now in the public comment period, which extends from January 28th through April 28th. And we've been doing a lot of briefings during this time, including to this group multiple times, in order to help inform the board's confirmation or modification of the preferred alternative expected in June, after which we will develop and then publish the final EIS anticipated in 2023. And then the board will select the project to build, and there will be a federal record of decision. So just a reminder, we have multiple alternatives that we are studying in this phase. We have in pink what we call preferred alternatives that were identified going into the draft EIS. We have preferred alternatives with third-party funding in brown, and in blue we have other draft EIS alternatives. So I won't be going through these alternatives in detail today, but there is a lot of information if others here or members of the public have not seen it on our website that describes all of the alternatives. And I do want to note that the concepts that we're describing today are not part of these draft EIS alternatives. So it has not changed the draft EIS based, with what you see here. So as I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of engagement. This is just a snapshot of the engagement process during the draft EIS. We've had a number of public meetings. We've had community advisory group meetings. We've completed 5 series of those, one group per segment. So we have 4 community advisory groups that have met pretty much every month as part of the draft EIS. We briefed them just this, in this past month in April on the draft EIS and cost savings and refinements work. And then we have one more meeting series of the community advisory group in May, anticipating to kind of consolidate feedback to help then report into the board process. We are looking at some board workshops. I think this may be moved to May now, but to look at additional work on the cost savings and draft EIS work, and consolidating the public comments, and looking at June for the board action to confirm or modify the preferred alternative. Just a quick snapshot of engagement we've done. In addition to those community advisory groups, we've been tracking comments as we've received them, and as of April 8th, so it's probably more than this by now, but we've received 820 plus comments. As mentioned, we've had a number of public meetings. We're also out there doing other community briefings and workshops. We have our online open house engaging more than 10,000 visitors. We've been doing property owner meetings and really just a whole bunch of other stuff. So just wanted to kind of mention that. All right, so that's just a quick intro. So I do want to now move into the cost savings and refinement concepts work. And as I mentioned, we have presented this really to a lot of other groups so far, and I wanted to make sure that the commission had this information in order to inform its comments on the draft EIS. So the kind of backing up in the context for looking at cost savings, really this stems from the steep rise in real estate and construction costs that we saw a couple years back. And as part of that, the board deliberated and then adopted a realignment plan in August 2021. And what that realignment plan did is look at the revenues and costs and schedule, and looked at identifying an affordable program schedule based on the costs and revenues that they were looking at the time. As well as affordability gaps to target schedules. So where there was an interest in trying to either keep on schedule or look at an accelerated schedule beyond the affordable program schedule, they identified potential what it would take to get there from a cost perspective. And on West Seattle Ballard, we do have an estimated project level affordability gap of 1.8 billion based on the current financial projections and cost estimates at the time. And what that translates into in terms of schedule is that for the Smith Cove to Ballard section of the project, the target delivery, so that target schedule would be 2037. The affordable schedule is 2039. So if that affordability gap is not filled, it will be the affordable schedule. And so as part of that realignment plan, the board directed us to look at potential additional revenue capacity as well as opportunities to reduce cost on the projects. Again, I want to note that these are not part of the draft EIS, as I mentioned before. This is really intended to be an initial assessment of the feasibility and the potential cost savings opportunity. So just an initial look at this based on limited engineering design. And all of these ideas would require further study of environmental, passenger experience and other implications. And so what we're essentially asking is, these are initial ideas and what do you think of them further? So we'll discuss two ideas today. As I mentioned, there's sort of cost savings specifically that could help address the affordability gap. But as we were doing the cost savings work, we also identified some ideas that may not have direct cost savings based on the way that was calculated, but they could potentially address other risks or opportunities. And really, these are things that we've learned as we've studied the project more, as we've done the draft EIS analysis and coordinated with our agency and stakeholder community partners. We've learned more about the project, and so it's a good opportunity to identify, other potential refinements that could also be looked at as part of this process. And again, because these are just initial ideas and they're not part of the draft EIS, what we're asking and seeking feedback on is whether to study any of these ideas further. And we're not seeking board direction at this time to adopt these ideas necessarily as part of the confirmation, the confirm or modify the preferred alternative action. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Really just, is it worth studying these ideas further? Okay, so I'll walk through the concepts in a little bit more detail. I'll start with the cost savings and then go on to other refinements. So starting with the cost savings concepts. So this is just an initial summary of the concepts. We've got about 5 concepts across the project. I'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail, starting in the West Seattle area and moving to downtown and then to Ballard. All right, in the West Seattle Junction segment, the cost savings idea here is shift elevated Fauntleroy station, and this relates to this elevated Fauntleroy alternative here shown in pink. Really, the background of this cost savings idea has to do with, so that in pink you see where the draft EIS alternative is, and it does affect kind of a more recent multifamily development. And so this looks at shifting that just slightly to the east in order to avoid that development. That could also avoid about 300 displacements and has a potential cost savings of about 200 million. I also just want to note, sorry, if you see this below, just a note of where the cost savings, how they're being expressed here. They're into 2019 dollars, which is consistent with what the cost estimate is in the draft EIS. And again, based on conceptual design and subject to change. Okay, the second idea, cost savings concept, has to do sort of maybe a bigger idea. So I guess just to also note, we have some maybe smaller ideas as this previous is just sort of a shift, and then some larger ideas which have more to do with consolidating or eliminating stations. So this is one of those ideas. This looks at eliminate Avalon Station, and it looks at it on a couple different alternatives. This first eliminate Avalon Station idea also pertains to that same alternative we just looked at, the elevated Fauntleroy alternative. So it combines that potential shift with eliminating the station. And you can see in green here is where that station would have been. If you eliminate the station, you save costs from not building the station. In this case, you also have a potential opportunity, if you will, of allowing a lower height guideway further east and at Del Ridge Station. And you have the same sort of result of shifting. And, based on the initial estimates we've done in terms of the effect of eliminating Avalon on ridership is that in this case, you would actually see similar overall ridership based on the locations of those station, overlapping walk sheds, and the ability to kind of shift transit integration to Alaska Junction as needed, you actually don't see a decrease in ridership based on our estimates. This would be a potential cost savings of $325 million. Again, that includes the savings from shifting, and just also noting here in terms of ridership, so showing daily trips on the project would be about the same. The second Eliminate Avalon station pertains to another alternative. This is the medium tunnel 41st alternative. And again, here you see in blue the DEIS alternative, and in green is where the eliminated Avalon station would have been. Again, you have some potential reduction in property effects and displacements from not building that station. And here, again, similar overall ridership. This has a potential cost savings of about 60 million. You don't have that, the addition from the shift as you saw previously. And here, just noting that you're eliminating a retained cut station. All right, those are the two in West Seattle. So in downtown, we've got a couple ideas. Here is, again, sort of a larger idea, if you will, consolidate Denny and South Lake Union stations. So in pink here, you see the draft DIS DT1 alternative, so the preferred alternative going through downtown. This has a Denny station at Westlake and a South Lake Union station at Harrison. And in green, you see a potential shifted alignment and station location that could be a consolidated station. One of the sort of reasons you might think about this, or potential trade-offs, is that it does avoid some of the streetcar impacts that are seen as part of the Denny station at Westlake. We have noted here that you could, from this potential station location at Dexter and Denny, connect into either of the Seattle Center stations, either at Republican or Mercer. You would potentially see some lower overall ridership on the line for the light rail system, although a lot of those riders would likely take other forms of transit. So overall, transit ridership would not necessarily be negatively affected. But on the project, could be about a 10,000 decrease in daily trips on the project. This has a potential cost savings of $575 million from eliminating construction of one of those stations. And then I also wanted to note, and Sloan might jump in here, we've done some initial thinking about what that could look like in terms of urban design and integration, and with transit and bicycle and pedestrian access. And so maybe Sloan could chime in and speak to this slide, if you don't mind.
Sure, Kate. So the concept with this station is to, sort of move, with this consolidated location into an area where we can sort of pick up not just any Triangle and South Lake Union, which are two areas that are served by the current two alternatives, but also start to plug into the street network that leads a little bit more directly to Belltown. So this, and while also preserving proximity to that major transit pathway coming off of Aurora Avenue North, which is really one of the big attributes, benefits of that South Lake Union station at Harrison Street. So this sort of gets into an area where you can integrate with buses operating on that corridor, operating on Denny Way, as well as on Dexter Avenue. And also plug into the bicycle facilities on Dexter and on Bell Street, which of course lead right into Belltown, and then on 7th Avenue North, which lead to Amazon HQ and some of those areas. You can see there are a couple of entrances proposed with this. I think, given that this is a very early concept, there's a lot of flexibility and maybe in thinking about the siting of those and the orientation of those entrances, whether utilizing portions of street right-of-way on John Street, for instance, or potentially partnering with the city to have an entrance that could be integrated into Denny Park somehow, which, as you know, is sort of negotiates the grade between Westlake Avenue and the higher elevation at Dexter. So that's the concept. Still pretty close to Thomas Street Greenway as well, which connects Seattle Center to Westlake and then the Cascade area beyond to the east.
Thanks, Sloan. And I do want to just reiterate that, again, we haven't done as much work on these as the other stations, but really what we were trying to do is, since we've been asked to look at these cost savings, identify them, really try to understand, from a feasibility perspective, it would be really important that these station locations could function in terms of connections and access. So that's the work that Sloan has just described. But it is just initial thinking. Okay, very good. Thank you. All right. Another set of ideas of cost savings in the concept in the downtown area have to do with potential refinements to station entrances. So I'll talk about a couple ideas that pertain to the Midtown, Westlake, and Denny stations next. And again, these are perhaps in the category of not quite as big ideas as station consolidation, but more refinements to how the entrances are located within the urban fabric. And really, these are also focused on, because real estate is such a big driver of costs in the downtown area and other parts of the project too, but particularly in downtown, it really looks at trying to avoid some of those risks or costs related with property acquisition. So here at Midtown, one of the concepts you're seeing does, again, relate to that. This is looking at the corner of Madison and 4th, and avoiding one of the potential properties needed for the project, and instead looking at trying to site entrances in the right-of-way. And here's a concept of an entrance within a sidewalk rather than on the private property. This would be a potential cost savings of about 20 million. Here's another idea at Westlake Station. This is looking at consolidating entrances. So I think currently we have a couple, 2 entrances here, north and south. These would eliminate these smaller entrances and instead consolidate it into one single entrance, but with multiple entry points into the actual station head house. And it would still integrate in with the other work that's going on to integrate and connect to the existing Westlake Station. And Sloan, if you have other things to add to these two, let me know. I can back up and go to those. This would be a potential cost savings about 190 million.
Yeah, if I could just offer a few more observations on this. Some of the cost savings here has to do with eliminating some of the entrances at the surface, as is indicated on this slide. But a big part of it also is looking at reconfiguring the internal functioning of the station, which, if you recall from our presentation, whenever that was in February, called for more use of sort of underpassages beneath the existing station. I think what we're looking at here is potentially expanding upon and utilizing more of the existing concourse and maybe expanding some of the existing platform level below grade to create a more direct transfer and circulation path that also minimizes the need to mine beneath the additional pedestrian tunnels beneath the station. And that could enable us to potentially also make a better passenger experience of transfer, and then maybe also introduces some other flexibility to design. It does entail a larger footprint on that block, but that also presents an opportunity for joint development.
Thanks, Sloan. And then the third downtown entrance refinement ideas at Denny Station. Again, this is looking at avoiding a property and instead looking at citing the entry in the Lenora Street right of way. Just noting here, this idea would be a permanent full closure of the street. And Sloan, any more you want to add on the entrances in the right of way ideas?
Just briefly that, with this and the other entrances, they would be located offset from the actual station box. So there would still be the need for some, below grade lateral movement from these access points. So sort of a mezzanine or a concourse level. So this doesn't necessarily assume the depth of the station itself and the need for that lateral movement to get to vertical circulation down to the platform changes, but it does represent a significant cost savings as well as a really interesting urban design opportunity.
Thanks. And I should have noted that the cost savings of this is 55 million, as you can see on the screen. Okay, so then in Interbay Ballard, we have one idea. This is related to the Ballard station, looks at shifting the 14th Ave tunnel alignment. And this again is not a huge shift. In brown, you see the preferred alternative with third-party funding to 14th. And in green is sort of the proposed shift. And really this is looking at shifting the alignment out of the roadway and a potential cost savings of 140 million. And just looking a little closer at this, currently the station guideway and the alignment and underground station box are located in 14th. Here, you're just looking at shifting that out of the roadway and into property, some of which was already anticipated to be needed for construction of the project and for the station entrances. So the entrances would remain on the east side of 14th. You could save additional costs if you eliminate this entrance on the west side of 14th. And so this cost savings includes that savings of eliminating an entrance and shifting out of the roadway. Okay, so those are the cost savings ideas. I'll now talk about the other refinement ideas. Again, these are ideas that may not particularly have cost savings as we've estimated it, but could have potential savings, if you will, or effects on risks or opportunities. There's about 6 ideas across the project that I'll talk about. And again, I'll start in West Seattle and move through downtown over to Interbay Ballard. The first idea is in the Delridge segment. This looks at, this Andover to medium tunnel alternative. This looks at providing access north and south of Andover Street. And just quickly, I guess this connects to either of these alternatives here. Looks at, accessing north and south of Andover for the purpose of, transit integration and community access. There's a couple different ways you might consider doing that. One way would be adding a pedestrian bridge across Andover that connects directly into the station. Another way you might look at expanding that access across Andover is actually shifting the alignment and the station south slightly. So this in blue is the draft EIS alternative. In green, you're looking at a potential shift of this alternative slightly south. One potential trade-off of shifting, you might need to close this roadway 32nd, but this could also allow you to lower the guideway and station if you were able to do that. In downtown, a couple refinement ideas. Again, another station entrance refinement. Again, this could reduce property risk here at the corner of 5th and Columbia, and again, looks at locating an entrance in the sidewalk on Columbia. There's a couple ideas in the Seattle Center area. These really are in response to concerns we've had on about construction of the stations in and around Seattle Center. The first idea is shift Seattle Center Republican Station to the west. And really this looks at, so currently the Seattle Center Station on Republican is located on the Seattle Center campus. This looks at shifting it slightly to the west in order to sort of move from some of those more direct impacts. And another idea that has been discussed is sort of mix and match, if you will, so connecting South Lake Union Harrison to Seattle Center Mercer Station. And here we're just noting and showing that that can work, and just a rough sketch of that connection. In South Interbay, there's a couple refinement ideas, and really these are centered around some of the risks and challenges, I think, of coming out of the tunnel portal in this South Interbay area. It's a steep slope. There's the Queen Anne Greenbelt. There's Elliott and 15th as a major freight route, and concerns about traffic impacts. And so a lot of these refinement ideas are looking at trying to reduce some of those impacts and avoid some of those risks. This first one we call Shift Tunnel Portal South to kind of Mercer area. Just looking at that a little bit more closely. Currently, we have two tunnel portals currently in the draft EIS. There's one here in pink on the pink alignment over at Republican. There's also another tunnel portal that comes from the blue alignment from Mercer here at Prospect Street. And so this really is focusing on refining the location of that portal that comes out of Prospect currently. So we looked at a couple ideas of could you try to avoid some of the hillside and steep slope effects, both from the portal and from the alignment that currently goes behind the Magnolia Bridge and Gaylor ramps here. And we did identify that you could potentially lessen some of those steep slope effects if you shift the tunnel portal south and if you shift the station north of the Magnolia Bridge. So again, just looking at this concept on its own, you would look at shifting the tunnel portal south, connecting to the Mercer alignment here. This could, as you see, it goes straight over Gaylor and across Magnolia instead of behind the ramps. You could potentially lessen some of those steep slope effects in this area, but you do still have some of those effects as well as potential park effects of the portal location a little bit further south. And that would be a slightly shifted station to the north, north of Magnolia Bridge. And then finally, another one of the station consolidation concepts. And again, this came from trying to look at ways to avoid some of those impacts. We looked at that more slight shift, and this looks at kind of really a newer idea of trying to avoid some of those impacts. So rather than having portals here on the hillside side of the South Interbay area, would actually stay in a tunnel, go underneath Elliott and 15th and underneath all of this infrastructure and stay in a tunnel until you're on the west side of 15th, sort of in the area just east of the Seattle Armory. You would then continue in a retained cut for a short period and then re-enter a tunnel toward Ballard. So just zooming in on that again for a minute. Sort of the dotted line represents this tunnel alignment going underneath the roadway and underneath that infrastructure, sort of daylighting in that area west of 15th and then re-entering a tunnel to Ballard with a station somewhere in this area, sort of east of the Armory property. So a couple of things to note about this potential refinement. By staying in a tunnel and continuing on to the west side of 15th, you do really avoid much more directly those parks, greenbelt, and steep slope effects. You avoid those traffic effects on Elliott that you see from the other tunnel portal, or the alignment that comes from the other tunnel portal along Elliott from Republican. You would see a potential minor reduction in overall ridership. We've showed that here, that on about a 2,000 decrease in daily trips on the project. And this would also potentially help avoid some emerging issues or risks and concerns we've identified as we've continued the study through this draft EIS phase, which has to do with the Interbay Golf Center, which is a former landfill. And so rather than constructing along the west side of that landfill, which the current preferred alternative with third-party funding do, you would actually avoid that. You would be on the east side of that area and going in a tunnel sort of just to the east of that. And again, in Interbay, you have a lot of coordination with the railroad, the BNSF Railway, and other Interbay properties that we've learned maybe redeveloped. And so this avoids some of those properties in the Interbay area. All right. Okay, and then we've done, again, another sort of initial test, if you will, of potential urban design access and integration ideas along with this consolidated station location. So I'd ask Sloan to just describe that a little bit.
Sure, thanks, Kate. So a few things to note about this. We have sort of two station areas that are now into one again with the consolidated concept. This moves Smith Cove slightly to the north, so it's moving further away from Expedia, which is a main destination, really kind of the main reason for the Smith Cove station. But it does move the station close to areas with significant development potential, specifically the Armory site and some of the current sort of commercial and industrial properties right around the Armory site. So this really sort of goes big on a vision of sort of thinking about this as a cohesive development area that's already has a public development authority that the state's created to look at the future uses on that property, and acknowledging that much of the thinking to date is really focused on sort of industrial uses that are sort of leaning into the future of industrial use. So really thinking about that as a job center. There's also some opportunities to stitch together the bike and ped network that's illustrated in this diagram. So including thinking about the frontage condition on 15th and having that function more as a multi-purpose trail, potentially creating a connection through the Armory site between the Elliott Bay Trail and the Ship Canal Trail. And also tying into the Howe Street Stairs and the Gaylor to Blaine Trail, which is currently an unimproved and I think actually closed trail facility up the Queen Anne Hillside, and having that tie in at Howe Street, which would become a major new gateway to the station as well as this potential development area. So that's what this is illustrating. As Kate mentioned, the retained cut character and sort of the two portals avoids a lot of hillside impacts, also avoids a lot of impacts to development along Elliott Avenue and in Interbay Triangle area. And it could connect to the Seattle Center Mercer station or either Ballard Tunnel station. Maybe one other thing to note, transit connections. This does present a departure from our current thinking on integrating link with the future metro network. So this would entail a slightly different circulation pattern for buses that we would need to work through with metro based on the future network. But we think that it could work decently and work quite well, and creates an opportunity also to bring more services closer to folks transferring between bus and rail and adjacent development next to the station.
Great, thanks, Sloan. All right, well, again, just wanted to note where we are in the process. I think that's my whole presentation. So I will stop there and turn it back to you. Yeah, Vanita, turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Kate and Sloan. We will first see if there are any members of the public who would like to make comment. Please use the raise the hand function. I'm not seeing anybody. Is there anyone from the city attending who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Anita, there's an attendee that has their hand raised.
Oh, okay. I see. Wesley, can I unmute him or her? Go
Hello.
ahead.
Unmuted.
Yeah, I was just wanting to comment that it seems there's a bit of an overly focus on trying to avoid construction impacts here and not enough panelists really thinking about the transit riders here. For instance, you guys keep talking about, like, the more you guys try to avoid construction impacts, the more that the transit experience is impacted itself. Have there been any analysis of trying to maybe making the transit experience better, but allowing for more construction impacts? For instance, like the deeper Chinatown station, that's going to entail much worse transfers, or these deep tunnel stations. You guys are trying to avoid visual car impacts, but those high costs means you guys are starting to lose entrances or even losing stations. Like, it's not necessarily good to remove all these construction impacts if you guys are going to make the transit experience much, much worse. Or even like that saved money. You don't necessarily have to use it on removing construction impacts. We could use the saved money to, for instance, extend up to Ballard High School or down to Westwood. Yeah, that's mainly my comments.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So Elaine, you want to kick off?
Great. Well, thank you for the presentation. That was very concise. I think we might have hit a record for being able to get through all of it. And I think a number of the commissioners did have a chance to preview the draft beforehand. It's also very complex in terms of the options, I think, that you're studying. And so I'm not sure. I think we'll see. We've got plenty of time for, I think, questions and comments today. But it likely, I think, our idea is that we'll take some of this and follow up in a letter with a more comprehensive, I guess, review of what you've presented today. So with that, I'm going to start with Amalia, and we're asking folks to ask questions and also provide comments at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. And I want to apologize in advance. I have to drop off this call at 10. I was mistaken on my time. But I did, similar to the public comment, I had some questions about with the shift of kind of that transit to transit connection, and in the spirit of time and service, because these stations are all going to be need to be accessed by pedestrians, transit riders, and cyclists, predominantly to get the mode shifts, as been discussed in previous presentations. So could you just talk a little bit about how you're moving forward with those discussions with Metro, for example, to identify some of those opportunities? And in some instances, I think it could just shift a cost to a different entity away from Sound Transit.
Sure, and I can start, and Sloan, why don't you chime in if you will. I guess I want to start by saying, you know, we have done just some preliminary work to try to, you know, again, I don't mean to keep saying it over and over, but really our charge was trying to find potential cost savings. So just, you know, we have been asked to do that. And so we've tried to identify ideas that could both save costs and then also try to, again, identify how they might work. So we've done some initial talking with the city and Metro about those potential access and transit integration opportunities, but I would say that, you know, more discussion would be needed to really kind of maximize or optimize any of these ideas. And Sloan, if you want to jump in there.
Yeah, everything that Kate said. Was there a specific concept, Amalia, that you were wanting to, you know, ask about specifically with the Metro Nexus?
I think some of the ones where there would potentially only be access on one side of the street, for example, or for the Inner Bay one that we just discussed, you know, kind of the routing of the bus. And I think some of the unintended consequences of that is then are there right-of-way improvements that will allow the buses to make those turning movements and to be on those other roads that are adjacent that are then additional costs. And is that then has that been factored in, or is that an unintended cost, and then who bears that cost? And again, it's those may not be high ticket items of hundreds of millions, but if it's repeated on multiple stations, then it can certainly add up again. So I think if I could shift kind of to my fellow commissioners, I think one of the things we may want to talk about in our letter, our recommendations that we follow up, is kind of what things we want to see as a priority, or at least, you know, potential risks of this cost reduction that we could want to see consistently, maybe. And you know, it's hard to add dollar values to some of those things at this point in the process. I fully appreciate that, but I think maybe if we could qualitatively have an understanding, because it seems like this is just such a kit of parts about, like, there's so many factors at play. I think what I'm looking for maybe is something that's a little, I hate to even say this, but like a matrix, like more comprehensive of, like, you know, for this $100 million cost reduction, what are some potential other risks or costs that may not be realized as part of this location or this decision. And then I think the other question I had is are there any other efforts just besides the construction costs? One of the things we noted, you know, just with the extension of a project timeline, there's costs that are to bear from the design and just organizational side that are kind of absent of construction. Is there other cost saving measures that are being identified that have major impacts beyond just some of these removal or consolidation efforts?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And, you know, unfortunately, the answer is that there really, there really aren't opportunities to save costs through schedule, if that's what, yeah. And, you know, we've did a comprehensive look, kind of a pretty big survey of, you know, a comprehensive survey of what all the potential cost savings ideas could be, and continued to kind of narrow that down into the list that you're seeing today. And so, you know, there aren't a lot of opportunities beyond some of the things we've identified today to really change costs or save costs. You know, we do have a lot of construction and permitting challenges and risks on the project. And I think the schedule that we already have will be a challenge to meet. And so there really aren't opportunities to further constrain or reduce that in order to save costs.
Okay, thank you. So in the interest of time, I'll be done with that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Amalia. Matt, you are up next. You're on mute.
Thank you. It looks like some of these alternatives do have possibilities, but I'm still getting up to speed on the WSBL, and I don't think I have anything significant to comment based on my understanding at the moment. So I'm going to pass my time off to others.
And Matt, before you do that, I think sort of the overarching question was, you know, are these cost savings ideas worth studying further? So it's sounding to me like you're in support of that.
Yeah, yes, thank you for clarifying that. It seems to me that there are some of them, I've been flipping through them as we've been talking, that seem to have merit for studying further. I guess I don't personally feel like I have enough detailed background to you know, with what I know right now to comment meaningfully.
Okay. And, you know, as we're talking through this, you might think about what is some of the information that could help in the future. So we can circle back if you've got some ideas at the end. Okay. And Erica, you are next.
Hi guys, thanks again for these updates. They're super helpful. My questions sort of aligned quite a bit with Amalia's. So I'm going to try not to duplicate, but in regards to the costs of that 2-year difference, obviously, you know, there was a huge change in real estate pricing during the analysis. And so I'm assuming, but as part of your ongoing cost projections, are you tracking ongoing development in and around these different alternative station locations? Just because I would hate to see another 300 unit development pop up next to one of these locations that you're looking at, and that impacting what the actual cost savings of those refinements would be. So I'd love to know a little bit just about that analysis part of things. I know that was a big part of the West Seattle adjustments.
Sure, Erica, thanks for your question. And yes, we are tracking that the best we can, and you know, would continue to try to respond as best we can. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say, but we do, you know, ourselves and in coordination with the city, are trying to get a handle on that and anticipate future development and how we might address it.
Great.
Sloan, I don't know if you have any more to add there, but.
Yeah, it's a big risk. It's one of the reasons why, you know, we're really looking at these right-of-way entrance concepts, especially downtown. As
Yeah,
like
that makes sense.
one sort of obvious way that we can sort of mitigate that risk. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I guess there are just a couple locations that stood out to me. So the Denny and South Lake Union Station refinement, I think I would say if there is opportunity to integrate into Denny Park, like you said, there's Seattle Parks property in that location that is sort of underutilized. If that was an opportunity for improving the condition of that site and the usability of that public space, I would agree that that could be a really wonderful sort of added benefit of that reduction of the station entrances might be the integration and the improvement of that public amenity. So I was happy to hear that you guys were thinking about that. And then in the Madison, or the Madison entrance, I know there's a pretty significant like plaza setback at that location adjacent to the Bartels. And so I think in those, the sidewalk options or the public right-of-way options, obviously there's, you know, some plazas that could be almost better utilized for public entrances. And so I think in those cases, it makes a lot of sense where it's not impeding on the public right-of-ways pedestrian usage, but it's utilizing a space that isn't requiring purchasing. So that was one of those things that I appreciate that are being considered, but I think that was an important one going forward. And then I think my other questions, I think I can hang on to. Oh, I guess my one other question was for the West Seattle adjustment of the sort of the first two alignments, that adjustment to the 42nd Street option. Do you guys know the ridership differences between that Fauntleroy one and the one that moves the station a little further west, because I could see a benefit in terms of like getting the station entrance closer to California. I was curious if that impacted ridership.
So, based on the ridership model that Sound Transit uses, which really is looking, it's at land use, it's also looking at the integration with the network. The estimate actually was for the Fauntleroy station to be slightly higher, just because there are more routes operating on Fauntleroy Way that would, drive ridership at that station. But I think your observation is correct that, having the station further to the west brings it closer to the junction, has a walkshed that picks up a lot of the new developments happening there, as well as the established destinations of the district.
I think that's it for me. I'll pass it on to Vanita.
Great, thanks, Erica. So I had a question related to the ones where you're proposing moving entrances into the right-of-way, sidewalk areas at Midtown stations, and I'm trying to picture how that works. And is it basically results in a whole change of that whole section of the street in order to also have enough sidewalk and all the other things that are happening in that street, besides the fact that people are also trying to get into a station, and kind of what the associated impacts are and to what level you've understood that. And related to that, would it stay as right of way, or is that or how does that work?
So I think actually, Kate, if we could pull that slide back up. I think that does call for expanding the curve out and taking a lane or possibly more from 4th Avenue section. Yeah, it looks like about a lane to accomplish this. So there is, there would be that revision to the street section and how the street's used. But, as has been observed, I think that, with that setback and that plaza that's right at the corner, you would sort of mask the footprint of the entrance itself. So you'd essentially be able to pick up some of that through pedestrian zone and landscaping zone with the plaza at the corner. It becomes a little bit tighter, further south towards Marion Street, which you can see in the diagram here because of the required ventilation, et cetera. But there may be opportunities to look at refining that too in the future. So yeah, this would require a lot of buy-in concurrence from the city in terms of using this section of the right-of-way for this purpose. But certainly has some great potential from this. In terms of how it would be treated, we haven't settled that. Typically, our entrances are right of way in a sense. So they are sort of owned and maintained by Sound Transit, but in this case, it would make sense that we have sort of more of an easement on this section, and it would be maintained or kept within the city's ownership.
Yeah, in concept, it's interesting. You certainly see it in other cities where, there's a very modest footprint with a nice, elegant, gateway of sorts that leads you into an entry. I think the concern is, what is the overall impact to that streetscape experience, and how does it have ripple effects, along that roadway, in this situation. So I'm curious. It seems like it would need a lot of study to make sure it would work and wouldn't be detrimental to the streetscape experience, especially with these ventilation structures. Trying to picture that as well. If it was just a sleek, small entrance, that's one thing, but if it has these ripple effects, that's a whole nother thing. And then I guess, with the proposals of consolidating stations, you know, when you bring up the Denny and South Lake Union stations, they're not really that many blocks apart. And while there's a lot of potential riders and maybe some who don't want to walk that 3 extra blocks, it does seem like there's not a huge gap in the, you know, where you can get out and access transit. You know, and this is my observation at a high level. And it did look like there were some interesting opportunities about this new proposed station location and its adjacency to Denny Park. But then when you look at the farther out areas where maybe our populations aren't as dense, but those are neighborhoods that are going to change more over time, you know, I guess I have more concerns about what the long-term impact would be of not having the, you know, those additional stations. So I don't know that I have enough information to give you an opinion on that, but I think that's something that is certainly, you know, very relevant to understand, you know, from long-term planning, what would be the impact of the loss of those stations. And then I don't have any other specific questions. You know, I definitely think there's a number of things here that are worth studying, especially if there could be some other net benefit. You know, if there's some, you know, a long-term win, you know, this ends up being more efficient for cost, and it also works really well because we're going to have less impact on this neighborhood, or this new station location is better for XYZ. So that would be the way I hope you're looking at it, and it sounds like that's being considered. Thanks. And I'll pass to Pooja.
Thanks, Vanita. I was also thinking about the consolidation of access in residential areas, and it would increase the amount of time it takes for people to get to a station if each station served a larger area of a residential area. Whereas downtown, you know, there's different ways of getting around. So having the stations slightly further apart seems like less of an impact for usability. The other piece was Denny Park. I think that's a great place to look. I think, you know, it obviously makes sense to avoid installation of tunnels and things in slopes where you can save cost. But that location in particular, it's, I think, something that could be used a lot more by the public if there was a light rail station there. And it's also such a steep area of town that, particularly for ADA accessibility, if the station could act as an ADA pathway from Westlake up to Dexter, I think that would be a huge benefit to the city. Right now, I'm a cyclist, and that's a difficult area to navigate, and I can't imagine how you would do it if you were in a wheelchair. So those were the 2 comments I had. I don't have any questions at the moment.
Great. We're going to hand it over to Molly.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for this presentation. We appreciate seeing all of this at this point in time so that as they develop, we'll be fully briefed on the direction that they may go. So thank you for that. I did want to, before some of my specific questions about specific changes, I'm curious to just hear more broadly what ongoing coordination with the city, what ongoing coordination with Metro and FSTAT is looking like, so that we can be useful in that process.
Sure. Yeah, we will have, I think, very close coordination. You know, when we have in this phase, as part of developing these cost savings and refinements ideas, you know, we met regularly to be able to share progress and get feedback. And, you know, again, as Sloan mentioned, talk about some of the access and integration and other, you know, ways we would need to work together on these. So yeah, it would be anticipated going forward if these were to move forward, and also just part of general EIS coordination, we would continue to work really closely to kind of continue to refine the refinements, if you will. Sloan, I don't know if you have more you want to add there, but.
You said it, we would just be, we've been coordinating through our co-planning effort really since the whole project development process started. So we would definitely be continuing that into the next phase. And I'll say that our focus in, you know, as we move into the final EIS is going to be really to do things like get into the cross section of streets and really detail out and confirm the different sort of circulation and access patterns that we showed on the conceptual site plans, not to mention refinements that would happen to the architecture and the structural engineering of these stations, since we've heard a lot of concern about depth and you know, the different vertical conveyances. So yeah.
Great,
Yeah, and
thank
if
you.
I could just add one more thing, sorry, I wanted to just mention that, you know, your question sparked this idea in me, which is, or just to remind that this is kind of a natural part of the process. I mean, it's really good that we're, you know, we're trying to do more work earlier than we have perhaps on past projects. It's a natural part of the EIS process to identify, you know, ideas for how to refine the project. In a way, this has just given us an opportunity to sort of get a leg up on doing a bit of analysis on ideas that, you know, could have come out through the comment period anyway, or, you know, things that might have come up. So again, this is just things that we've identified. There may be other ideas that come out of the process. So sort of just part of what we what we do, and we've had a good opportunity, or it's been a good opportunity to kind of do some advanced kind of looking at with the city and Metro and others, and you know, we would continue to do that. So,
Great, and we appreciate the
thanks.
transparency to that process, so thank you. Additional thoughts, just going through individual options. So on the first, on number one, that avoids 300 displacements, we appreciate seeing this type of study happening on any of the stations, and we'll be interested to see any as they continue for that location and others, just those fine-tuned avoidances of existing and new development. So we appreciate seeing that. On 2B, so in general, with looking at removal of stations, and that one, 2B being the Avalon removal, it would be interesting to understand what those real benefits are for the communities in the area. So if you are losing a station, to really understand, does that allow a tunnel rather than a, so knowing that 2A was the above grade and that 2B was the tunnel, really understanding, is the community getting a benefit like having an underground tunnel by losing a station, I think could be really important. I know that that's been reflected in community comments as well. And then on number 3, consolidating Denny and South Lake Union, I think we've already heard others interested in that as a continued study. Some notes on pieces of that study that I think would be really useful would be particularly an exploration with Metro of what existing routes look like connecting to that station, and any changes that they'd be willing to make to those routes in order to make that station successful. I think that would be incredibly useful, because that 10,000 decrease in daily trips is significant, but as others have mentioned, there's a lot of other connectivity, but being really clear about what that connectivity is and how Metro is ready to work with you all to make that a success moving through downtown would be fantastic. On 4A, so that's the Madison and 4th, we've already discussed some of the things within the right of way, so I won't beat a dead horse there. But I'm also curious on that one about any joint development opportunities that have been explored as alternatives to existing within the right of way. Can either of you speak to that?
Yeah, so the Midtown station, has never really been a focus for our TOD and joint development study, largely because that footprint's quite constrained of the Bartell site in particular. So I think there is some interesting potential at the south entrance, so closer to Columbia Street at the Bank of America Tower. But there's recently been some pretty substantial investment right where the entrance is proposed in a new public space or a new amenity space. And so that's really sort of driving one of the reasons why we're looking at the Columbia Street right-of-way concept there as well. In that particular part of downtown, you just have really well-established, very expensive real estate. You really just want to figure out how you can insert elegantly, and minimize your effect. So that's really driven that Madison proposal in particular.
Great, thank you, Sloan. So then moving from that one into 4B, I'm definitely curious to hear, Sloan, you mentioned some of the potential benefits of having this single head house. You mentioned some of the benefits about connectivity to the existing, and so really seeing that as that study develops, really seeing comparatively having those multiple head houses versus having some of the potential connection in plan and section would be incredibly helpful for us to weigh each of those options. And then I had a question on Ballard. So I know, Kate, you mentioned that the cost savings was including reducing the additional entrances on the west side of 14th. And I'm curious, can the realignment be done? And I'd want to know, what are the cost savings if you were to leave the entrance on the west side of 14th? Can those two things be separated from each other?
Yeah, I don't have the number in my head at the moment of what the differential is there. I mean, although I guess I will say that, a driver here of the cost of that is that property, 14th and Market, that Safeway property is part of the cost issue here. So I think you would probably lose most of the cost savings from putting that entrance back. There's a bit of cost savings involved in avoiding some of the utility relocation in the roadway, but I would say that the biggest proportion is the property cost and the construction of the entrance.
Okay, great. And it would be interesting to know if any other properties were being considered. But I know a lot of the property cost issues aren't going to change by changing the property itself. But I know that one of the things that came up in our review of that area was 15th versus 14th and being closer to the heart of Ballard. So just understanding what those opportunities are and whether you get any cost savings would be really helpful. So thank you for that, for giving that high level understanding. And then finally on...
If I could actually just add one thing that's important to underscore with that. So a big part of the proposal is to drop that west entrance, which enables us to save the property acquisition cost. It also removes one of the big equitable TOD opportunities that we identified with the project. So, one way to sort of think about how we could make up for that is if we're off of that property entirely, if it's redeveloped in the future, using incentive zoning or other mechanisms that the city could bring to bear to provide for an opportunity to tie in an entrance in that development on the west side of 14th. Could be an interesting possibility there that preserves the benefit of the access, even if we're foregoing the equitable TOD opportunity on that site.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that context, Sloan. Okay, and then finally, I was interested in on the stations adjacent to the Armory. It seemed like there were definitely some benefits to that being near potential TOD areas, but I would definitely be interested in seeing some walk sheds associated with the cruise ship terminal and Expedia, so we can really understand how much we're losing that access to each of those and how much folks would be likely to, within, say, a 10-minute walk, shed access those primary locations. And then I had one other question. So on areas that we didn't discuss today, I'm just curious to hear if there's any further development and conversations with the city about any changes around the CID station. So I'm curious if any additional potential for connectivity between Union Station and King Street Station has been explored.
So there's actually an online open house currently for a related project that Sound Transit is looking at, improvements to the King Street Sounder platform, increasing the capacity, egress capacity, as well as additional access opportunities there. So we've been coordinating internally and also in a few conversations with the city, since it could really nest within some of the frameworks that we were talking about in our presentation on CID a month or so ago. Particularly in thinking about the nexus with 2nd Avenue Extension South and the crossing conditions of 4th Avenue South. Yeah, I mean, generally, the Union Station, really thinking about how that can be activated with retail and other community serving uses is something that could be done really in either alternative. But I think as our diagrams showed, there is that sort of more, it's more on the way of the transfers between Link and Link, as well as between Sounder and Link potentially. But to really leverage the full potential of that, we would really need to partner with the city to be looking at the configuration of 4th Avenue South, as well as the use and programming of the 2nd Avenue Extension South bridge.
Great, thank you so much for the update on that, Sloan. And that's it on my end.
Great. Elizabeth, you are next.
Also, thanks for all the information and for involving us at this point. Kate talked about this being a natural process, and I appreciate our involvement in this. I have a very basic question. If it's too long to answer, I can get an answer later. How do you calculate this change in ridership for each of these changes or modifications?
Yeah, I could speak to that, and Sloan, maybe you have more detail, but we do ridership modeling, and so we just did some sort of initial adjustments based on the station location and kind of assuming a network, transit integration network. And Sloan, I don't know if you have more detail on that you could add.
Yeah, so it's nesting within a larger regional travel demand model, which has sort of a fixed input based on land use and transit overall system ridership. So when you see differences in ridership, typically in what we're reporting, it's just assuming that ridership is moving elsewhere in the system. So for instance, the 10,000 trips transfers that would be between bus and rail that would be diminished with the consolidated station is just suggesting that those trips would move likely to Westlake. So you'd be adding those trips potentially to Westlake and other stations that might be transfer points. You're essentially just changing the calculus of riders as they're deciding how to access and navigate the system. So that's sort of what explains the difference. I think that one of the things that, for instance, with the consolidated Smith Cove Inner Bay is showing a 2,000 rider difference, again, largely driven by where people are choosing to transfer between bus and rail in the system. What it's not accounting for is any changes in intensification of land use, additional destinations and jobs, et cetera, that might be created in the immediate vicinity of the station and might be more accessible. So that is an important differentiator to note that sort of sets that concept apart, frankly, from even all the others.
That's really helpful. One of my concerns with eliminating stations has to do with equity, and part of equity for me is not just looking at large employers like Expedia and like Amazon, but also looking at how people in a variety of different neighborhoods get to and from work from outside, going from the neighborhood to somewhere else. So a couple of my concerns, I'm hoping, I know that Avalon Station was identified as something important by SDC back in 2018 to potentially not lose that station, or it's and that comes under some questions of and concerns about equity. I feel similarly about Denny and the South Lake Union and Denny consolidation. I'm wondering about, what also exists uphill, which is a lot of residents that were initially impacted by the freeway coming through. So I'm hoping that these bird's eye views of what can be done will also get some fine-grained look at how people are going to use this system and how they can access them from where they are. So that's where some of my strong concerns about eliminating stations comes from. I also think it's really interesting to connect with Denny Park. I agree with earlier comments about that. One suggestion as you're going forward in all these refinements, I think it might be helpful for each of these areas of interest for consolidation or refinement to ask the question, what is a station for this particular place? Because stations aren't just one thing, and they could be very different. And I know there's certain standardization that is important to Sound Transit, but I also think, especially looking at this time in what can be done, what can be pulled together, what can maybe pulled apart, it would be a good idea to have a discussion of what that is for this particular place, for this context, and for the needs of users. And one last comment, it's a little bit of a red herring, but I noticed in the last presentation, I was interested in how ST1 aerial guideways compared to the plans for use of concrete in some aerial structures coming forward. So one way to conserve some costs might be to look again at ST1, because they seem to be lighter, slimmer, and possibly another model. I'll just leave with you with that. You don't need to comment on that. And I will pass this on to Jill. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I think this is great that you guys continue to sharpen the pencil on this. And my overall perception is that it gets better the more you look at it, and the more you learn, and the more you can really study stuff. Specifically, a couple of places to talk about, and I think this is on the focus of what we've been reminded is what would we like, whether this is worth studying or what we'd like to see you study further. Back at the very beginning in the West Seattle piece, Kate, you compared one of the preferred alternatives with the Fauntleroy, but not, your diagrams don't compare the other preferred alternative, which is closer to California. And I can't decide if you're tipping your hand and not looking at that much anymore, or I think your map would be helped if you had both of those shown instead of just the one. Do you understand what I'm asking here or saying? That
Yes,
what
I
I have
understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. What I have is page 13 shows the two pink preferred alternatives, right? And then when I go to the next page, it's just the one on Fauntleroy, not the one further up. And I think if you want to build the case for why this might be a better, not just a $200 million cost savings, but why it might be the right thing to do to eliminate Avalon, you should probably show the other one too. So that again, it's similar to what you're showing further with the Denny Park one, that you're splitting the difference between these two alternatives. And that the move is more than just a half a block. I mean, potentially it's the move of 3 or 4 blocks, right, to the east.
Yeah, let me pull up that slide. Yeah, I wasn't trying to tip my hand. I think I was, if anything, it was just a function of just trying to show specifically where, so I guess that's, yeah. So really it was just noting that you're right, there's in the junction, we have the two pink alternatives here at Fauntleroy and this at 42nd. It was really just noting that this potential cost savings pertains to this
Right.
aspect of the alternative. Yeah.
But where you'd
And then
land
in
on
terms
that,
of the elimination, again, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess it could also, I'd have to go back and look to see if it also pertains to the further west alternative, but
it probably
or
does. You might.
yeah,
Yeah. And then in
although
terms of,
yeah, okay, go ahead.
no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I just didn't want to ask you, you don't need to analyze that right this minute, it's just, that was just a thought I had. And in terms of moving forward with this, is if this is something that you really want people to look at, then I think you link the moving of this station potentially from as far west as California back to what is this 38th Street, and then you link it with the tunnel, and then you link it with the lower guideway into Delridge, and now you start to have a package that addresses a whole bunch of concerns we've heard. And right now, what we're seeing it in this early stages as these little pieces, and we have to kind of mentally put it together as this bigger package. But I think that as a next step, packaging some of these things to be a cohesive story that might actually be compelling and a reasonable compromise might be one of the next steps.
Yeah, I did want to note that the eliminate Avalon. So in order to have cost savings, we've been comparing to the preferred alternative, which is the basis essentially in the financial plan, in the realignment plan. So that is what the cost savings essentially apply to.
Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of taking a revised kind of, because we keep talking about this is the chicken and egg, the alignment versus the stations and how they both feed into each other. It looks like there's some pieces that could be strung together there that would tell a story about station reductions and some alignment improvements that might be great to shop. And I think that, again, what I have is page 20, but you probably have is a bigger number, is what that shows is what is the Denny South Lake Union consolidation and the station on Dexter and the park and Denny. And, that's a relatively compelling relocation of both stations and alignment, right? Because it straightens out the alignment as well. And I don't know if your cost savings have the alignment straightening out in them as well, but that to me looked like a more, I could see how that's a more complete thought. And then you could add to that, moving the Seattle Center Station further west. And then I think you could do that study of how it's the difference between stations. And I think you'd find, again, from an equity perspective, that your spacing becomes pretty reasonable that you're proposing with the elimination of the station. So it's just a thought about what one of the next looks at that would be. And then the only other thing I want to say is, yes, I think you should definitely study the station entrances in the right of way. As Vanita said, other cities make this happen, and I think it behooves us to, as a city, look at that. And I think more information is needed about the Inner Bay Smith Cove thing. I did not, that was the one where I really didn't see how you got the ridership numbers and how buses from residential Magnolia. I mean, it's one thing to talk about how it's going to affect potential job things, but there's also a residential piece that I think is missing from what we saw today. And that's it for me. Thanks, Elaine.
Great. All right. I think that's everybody. We're just about at time, so I'll try to quickly wrap up with my comments and probably save some of my more specific station-related comments to a follow-up letter. But I mean, overall, I really appreciate the thinking that's gone on into this and all of the new opportunities that are potentially created with transit, walkability, bikeability, et cetera. I think, it's worth continuing to study the consolidation with the thought that if two stations coming together as one can provide a better passenger experience. I think I feel like that's the thinking that we should be putting into this, and to sort of build upon what Jill was saying. I think for me, it's like having a better understanding comprehensively about how that consolidation, not just works in that one area, but along the alignment, sort of co-joining opportunities, I think could tell the story and will really start to inform like what really is a good opportunity. And I generally would like to see more information about on the individual slides about what's the walk shed around each area, I mean, it sounds like you've addressed the ridership, like it's generally about the same, or it just sort of moves somewhere else in the system. But I think like right now we just have these slides that show, oh, this is moving 2 or 3 blocks, but what does that really mean, to the walk shed and the people that might actually be using it? And then of course we've got Seattle and topography issues that can make things read very differently. But I think sort of having a better comprehensive overview of some of the things that you're proposing will certainly help. I also really appreciate the question from the public about, sort of building upon this, like how do we save money to do better, and we should be looking to do this at all, all station locations throughout the alignment, and looking for opportunities like if we save here, can we do this great thing over here? The thought of like having a transit stop at Ballard High School, like amazing. I know the alignment doesn't go that far, but I think that's sort of an example of being proactive. And it sounds like you continue to have these refinements in the process, but would just encourage you to keep thinking that way, and hopefully there's a culture of thinking that way. I do have a question about, I don't know, like 1.8 billion, like what part of the pie is that? How much money are we talking about over this entire investment?
Sure. I think the base cost that's based on is about 12.5 billion.
12.5 billion. Okay.
Or so, something like that.
Okay. So it's big. And then my other question, I don't really understand the third-party funding piece. And so when you show alternatives that say, maybe we can do this if we get third-party funding, and I think you explained that this being over 1.8 billion is really looking at what's above and beyond preferred alternatives. So we're not even taking into account additional dollars that might be needed for the third-party funding piece. But do you have a sense of like what those third-party funding options equate to? Like what is that above and beyond the 12 billion?
Yeah, I'll try to speak to that. Well, the definition of third-party funding really came from when the board identified the alternatives to study in the draft EIS, and the board wanted to take forward the alternatives that were affordable, as well as alternatives that there was a lot of interest in studying further, tunnels in West Seattle and Ballard, but acknowledging that those were more expensive. So they identified those as, preferred with third-party funding, and essentially that in order for those to be identified going further as preferred, there would need to be some identification of funding from third parties. outside of Sound Transit in order for those to be identified as preferred going forward. I will note that that was based on the cost estimates at the time going into the draft EIS, and I think you've seen the briefing on the draft EIS results, and with that we've presented some costs, and there are areas of the project where the costs for the preferred with third-party funding. Ballard is a good example. Currently, the preferred 14th elevated is about the same cost as the preferred 14th tunnel. And so, that is an area where that could potentially change as the board confirms or modifies the preferred alternative. Similarly, in West Seattle, the medium tunnel is about the same cost now as the preferred. And so, again, those costs have changed, and so there's an opportunity for the board to address that in their action going forward.
Okay.
But in terms of the cost savings work, yes, that does apply then to essentially, the way we've presented it is that it applies to the preferred cost. Essentially, that was the cost that was part of the realignment plan. So.
Okay. I think what I was kind of getting at is because now we're in this, value engineering mode, does it mean that those options are off the table? And so I guess I'm encouraged to hear that maybe some of the costs are coming a little bit closer. And as Jill was saying, like there might be some great opportunities to go, do a little a la carte of now starting to look at like what are the best, like what is the best alignment or alternatives, and be able to integrate some of the things that are good, really good about those alternatives as well. The one thing I was kind of discouraged to hear, and I'm sure you guys have done a ton of study, is that like there's nothing beyond what we've seen that can offer cost savings. Because I started thinking about like, are there opportunities to streamline schedule? Are there opportunities to save on design costs? Are there opportunities to procure in a different manner? Can we procure today to save, escalated costs in the future? And I'm sure everybody's sort of looking under a number of different rocks, but I have to imagine that there are other ways to save. And I was wondering if there has been like a peer review or sort of like a third party, because sometimes I think that the folks that are most, working on the project on a day-to-day basis aren't always the best at sort of taking a step back and understanding like, where are some opportunities, or asking, the dumb questions that sometimes lead to great savings ideas. So is there any outside sources that are helping with this effort?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Elaine. And I should probably change my statement that there's no possible other way to save costs. I will say that, all the things you just mentioned in terms of, looking at ongoing design and, concrete, I think all of those things are things, yes, we would continue to look as we progress the project at all those areas you would look at to continue to save costs. I will say, however, though, at the scale that we're talking about here, in terms of trying to close a 1.8 billion affordability gap, this is what we found in terms of those bigger items. They're just really, and then it's particularly in terms of schedule. The ST3 plan, I don't know if you remember, but it was originally going to be a more extended schedule. The schedule was compressed in response to interest in delivering the project sooner. And as part of that, there was, a commitment to try to streamline the projects. And so the original delivery dates were already based on sort of a compressed schedule. And so the realignment plan has not necessarily provided any additional time in order to, deliver the projects. Yeah, at least at this point, we haven't found an opportunity in terms of schedule to really, and streamlining, we're already assuming streamlining is needed to meet the delivery dates that we have. But you're right. I think as we continue to go through the project, there would be those interest in looking further. And then in terms of third-party review, these have been reviewed by third parties. We have that process ongoing now in terms of third-party review related to costs. That was also part of the realignment work.
Great. And I have to imagine that other transit agencies across the nation are facing similar challenges with, inflation and the, just costs rising generally, right? And so I wonder, I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking about trying, like, how can you leverage, relationships with some of our local agencies. On the federal side, it's probably more difficult, but are there opportunities to be working with the city to help try to streamline some of the reviews and permitting timelines and things like that in an effort to save dollars and be able to offer the ridership greater amenities. So I know that's sort of a pie in the sky easier thing to say than to do, but I mean it could be a way to really distinguish Sound Transit as a leader in delivering transit. And I just don't know if there's other agencies that are doing it, that could be models that we could point to and look at. So something to think about. I think generally, I think that a number of these ideas are worth studying, and I would also agree that I see a lot of potential in that Denny station. I also have questions about Smith Cove. I think that's a hard area for all of us to understand because of future land use opportunities in that area. I have a lot of concerns about Ballard. I live in that area, and I just think having to cross another major intersection to get to the heart of Ballard just poses a lot of challenges, but also recognize the future benefit of the urban village upzoning to the east of 15th as well. But I think that one just needs a lot more study. And I'm disappointed to hear that Safeway doesn't want to lower their prices, I guess, to support public transit. So, but with that, I think I'm going to end my comments. And as I said, we will collect comments and provide them to you. So is there anybody else that on our commission that wanted to make any further comments before we wrap up? Doesn't sound like it. Well, really appreciate.
I didn't get to my
Erica.
button fast enough. Sorry.
Okay.
The only thought I had as you were speaking, Elaine and Jill, others, about sort of the equity-based issues. If, I know we didn't really talk about sort of across the entire system, if we're looking at reduction in one area, how that could benefit those neighborhoods that are less serviced right now and sort of historically by these types of investments. So, I think there may be, it may make sense just sort of theoretically to think about if you're removing a station from an area that's already heavily serviced by transit, how can that then benefit the communities that are underserviced by transit? Thinking about that, not just in terms of the immediate area, but across the city and how we're sort of redistributing those efforts.
Great. Thanks, Erica.
If I may.
Sloan, yeah, go ahead, Sloan.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of comments about this. And so, we have as part of our study of those two consolidation concepts, we showed an image of the Denny SLU one, but didn't really show something at Smith Cove, partially because it's a little bit, there's some larger questions just around engineering and such, but I do want to just quickly show you what we have been thinking to help illustrate how this would work. So one big difference over our existing proposal is that buses coming from Magnolia, which are largely using the existing Magnolia Bridge, would currently turn right and essentially be able to drop curbside at the preferred alternative station location. At the further south ones, they would continue running south and then probably drop on the west side of Elliott, requiring a crossing. With this concept, the buses would be turning left, and that would trigger a need for, signal upgrades and the like. But then provide a dedicated transit pathway into the station site and allow zones inbound and outbound to be consolidated, with then a right out circulation pattern to go southbound, or a left turn to go north. As part of the city's BERT study, they were already thinking about freight access and bus lanes on 15th. So this would assume that to really optimize those movements and service patterns from both south and north, as well as from Magnolia, that those lanes, would be made available, to help facilitate bus movements here. Another critical dimension of the program, of course, is bus layover. And if we consolidate, we have a larger number of bus layovers. So this concept here is sort of thinking about how the layovers could be programmed on Port of Seattle property. So we'd be able to work with the port and city to sort of optimize this. And then, of course, have the station right next to the Armory site. So the walk shed at the Smith Cove station in the current proposal is very constrained. This would actually, extend that both to the west and to the east. The trade-off with this proposal, of course, is that there wouldn't be the Dravis interbay station, so you would lose that walk shed. Through some of the frontage trail improvements, through the bus service that's planned, you might be able to offset that with access into this more centralized station location. So just wanted to provide a little bit more context on that.
So if you had this station, you would eliminate Dravis, and then your next station isn't until Ballard.
Correct.
Thanks for sharing this, Sloan.
It's helpful.
Yeah, good to see that there's this thinking going on. Great. So wrapped up for the day, and I would just reiterate. I think at our last session, Sloan and Kate, there was a lot of thank you for all these presentations, because we know what an effort it is, and we continue to appreciate to be informed in this way and have this opportunity for conversation, and to keep this a good co-planning effort with the city moving forward. And